you have read the book of Daniel, you will have noticed that the first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel, it's all about stories, interesting, exciting, intriguing stories. And then 7 through 12, you have prophetic chapters that mirror the first part of the book of Daniel, but put it in a prophetic sense. And we were going to get into that in depth later on. But tonight, we have the second chapter, another story that you might be well acquainted with. And we are going to be reading that chapter shortly. I'm going to start to share my screen now so that we can get right into the book of Daniel, chapter 2. Okay, it's all about the vision of the image. Now, this chapter, it's about the dream that took place during the first year of Daniel's presence in the palace. And you will notice that this chapter really proves the authenticity of the Bible and the power of God. It will show you how God predicted in 605 BC, that's 2,600 years ago, what would take place from that time right on down to the second coming of Jesus. And so far, everything has come to pass just exactly as God prophesied. Now, I am going to be reading the chapter. It is quite easily understood, but then after reading the chapter, I will do a brief review of last week to tie in with tonight, and then we will get into the story behind the story, because there's a lot of information regarding the second chapter of Daniel that you will not pick up by just reading the chapter. So let me read the chapter for you at this time. One night during the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had such a disturbing dream that he could not sleep. He called in his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, astrologers, and he demanded that they tell him what he had dreamed as they stood before the king. He said, "I have had a dream that deeply troubles me, and I must know what it means." Then the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic, "Long live the king, tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means." But the king said to the astrologers, "I am serious about this. If you don't tell me what my dream was and what it means, you will be torn limb from limb. Your houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. But if you tell me what I dreamed and what the dream means, I will give you many wonderful gifts and honors. Just tell me the dream and what it means." They said again, "Please, please, your majesty, tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means." The king replied, "I know what you're doing. You are stalling. You're stalling for time because you know I am serious when I say, if you don't tell me the dream, you are doomed. So you have conspired to tell me lies, hoping I will change my mind. But tell me the dream, and then I'll know that you can tell me what it means." The astrologers replied to the king, "No one on earth can tell the king his dream, and no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer. The king's demand is impossible. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they do not live here among people." The king was furious when he heard this, and he ordered that all the wise men of Babylon be executed. And because of the king's decree, men were sent to find and kill Daniel and his friends, because they were now part of the staff of the palace. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, came to kill them, Daniel and his three friends, Daniel handled the situation with wisdom and discretion. He asked Arioch, "Why has the king issued such a harsh decree?" So Arioch told him all that had happened. Daniel went at once to see the king and requested more time to tell the king what the dream meant. Then Daniel went home and told his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah what had happened. He urged them to ask the God of heaven to show them his mercy by telling them the secret, so they would not be executed along with the other wise men of Babylon. That night, the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. Verse 20, he said, "Praise the name of God forever and ever, for he has all wisdom and power. He controls the course of the world events. He removes kings and sets up other kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars. He reveals deep and mysterious things and knows what lies hidden in darkness, though he is surrounded by light. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors, for you have given me wisdom and strength. You have told me what we ask of you and revealed to us what the king demanded." Then Daniel, he went in to see Arioch, whom the king had ordered to execute the wise men of Babylon. Daniel said to him, "Do not kill the wise men. Take me to the king, and I will tell him the meaning of his dream." Arioch quickly took Daniel to the king and said, "I have found one of the captives from Judah who will tell the king the meaning of his dream." The king said to Daniel, "Is this true? Can you tell me what my dream was and what it means?" Daniel replied, "There are no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or fortune tellers who can reveal the king's secret, but there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the future. Now, I will tell you your dream and the visions you saw as you lay on your bed. While your majesty was sleeping, you dreamed about coming events. He who reveals secrets has shown you what is going to happen. And it is not because I am wiser than anyone else that I know the secret of your dream, but because God wants you to understand what was in your heart. In your vision, your majesty, you saw standing before you a huge, shining statue of a man. It was a frightening sight. The head of the statue was made of fine gold. Its chest and arms were silver. Its belly and thighs were bronze. Its legs were iron, and its feet were a combination of iron and baked clay. Verse 34, as you watched, a rock was cut from the mountain, but not by human hands. It struck the feet of iron and clay, smashing them to bits. The whole statue was crushed into small pieces of iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold. Then the wind blew them away without a trace, like chaff on a threshing floor. But the rock that knocked the statue down became a great mountain that covered the whole earth. That was the dream. Now we will tell the king what it means. Your Majesty, you are the greatest of kings. The God of heaven has given you sovereignty, power, strength, and honor. He has made you the ruler over all the inhabited world and has put even the wild animals, birds under your control. You are the head of gold. Verse 39. But after your kingdom comes to an end, another kingdom inferior to yours will rise to take your place. After that kingdom has fallen, yet a third kingdom represented by bronze will rise to rule the world. Following that kingdom, there will be a fourth one as strong as iron. That kingdom will smash and crush all previous empires, just as iron smashes and crushes everything it strikes. The feet and toes you saw were a combination of iron and baked clay, showing that its kingdom will be divided. Like iron mixed with clay, it will have some of the strength of iron. But while some parts of it will be as strong as iron, other parts will be as weak as clay. This mixture of iron and clay also shows that these kingdoms will try to strengthen themselves by forming alliances with each other through intermarriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron and clay do not mix. During the reigns of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed or conquered. It will crush all these kingdoms into nothingness, and it will stand forever. That is the meaning of the rock cut from the mountain, though not by human hands, that crushed to pieces the statue of iron, bronze, clay, and silver and gold. The great God was showing the king what will happen in the future. The dream is true, and its meaning is certain. Remember that verse. The dream is true, and its meaning is certain. The king, Nebuchadnezzar, threw himself down before Daniel, worshipped him, and he commanded his people to offer sacrifices and burn sweet incense before him. The king said to Daniel, "Truly, your God is the greatest of gods, the Lord over kings, a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this secret." I want you to notice that verse there, 47, because we're going to come back to it. He was not totally converted. He still had his eyes on the other gods, but he acknowledged Daniel's God. And finally, verse 48 and 49, then the king appointed Daniel to a high position and gave him many valuable gifts. He made Daniel ruler over the whole province of Babylon, as well as chief over all his wise men. At Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be in charge of all the affairs of the province of Babylon, while Daniel remained in the king's court. Now, before we get into the meat of chapter 2, I want to briefly review with you what we studied last week to connect it with chapter 2. You remember last week I had some difficulty with the internet. I'm thankful that everything is running smoothly so far. Now, we discovered last week that the book was open in the hand of the angel in Revelation, which meant that it was sealed at some time. And we read in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 4 that Daniel was told to seal up the book. Now, the parts of the book that were sealed were just the parts dealing with the last day events, 2300 days, and the other events pointing to the last days of this earth's history. But the first part of the book, that was a wide open book. Now, we also said that God gave an Israelite king, Jehoiakim, into the hands of a heathen king, Nebuchadnezzar. Now, how does that make sense for God to do such a thing? If we go back into history a bit, we will notice that through the years, most of the Israelites chose not to love and obey God. Around 931 BC, after the reign of King Solomon, the Israelites divided into two separate and quarreling nations. You had the kingdom of Judah in the south and the kingdom of Israel in the north. I talked a little bit about that last week and why it is that they separated over taxation and the taxation that Solomon had put on the people were too steep. They separated. So you had 10 tribes going to the north. They were called the kingdom of Israel. You had 2 tribes going to the south, Judah and Benjamin. That kingdom was called the kingdom of Judah. So those are the 12 tribes that separated after they got into a disagreement. So there you have the list of the 10 tribes at the top, and the bottom you have the 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, the northern kingdom. Now, if the inhabitants of Israel would have repented and choose to reflect the pure and gracious character of God, God would have worked a miracle to protect them from their enemies. I should have mentioned something here with this tribe in the north. You remember the Samaritans? How in the Bible it talks about how the Jews didn't like the Samaritans. Well, the Samaritans, they were part of the northern tribe. The Samaritans were half Jews, half Gentiles. When the Jews started intermarrying with the Gentiles, that is how you came about with the Samaritans. And so I just wanted to bring that point out, that the Samaritans, they were part of the northern kingdom. Now let's go here. Several prophets appealed to the kingdom of Judah as others had appealed to the kingdom of Israel. You have Micah, Isaiah, Habakkuk. Even after God gave up the Jews to their enemies, he still offered them another chance. He promised that after 70 years of exile in Babylon, that's where we are now in the book of Daniel, with the exiles there in Babylon. It says he would make a way for them to return to their home in Jerusalem. And we studied that in our Sabbath school lesson in Isaiah, Jeremiah, or Ezra and Nehemiah, sorry. There were exceptions, however. For example, when the Assyrians laid siege to Jerusalem in 701 BC, that was 100 years before Daniel and his 3 friends were taken to Babylon. When the Assyrians laid siege, King Hezekiah turned to God for help rather than to idols.
This week's lesson.
Hezekiah purified and repaired the temple, purged its idols, and reformed the priesthood. In an effort to abolish idolatry from its kingdom, he destroyed the high places. Now, if you had gone to Israel on the Holy Land tour, you'd have seen some of these high places built up by stones. It's like a square made up of stones, and on top of those stones, they would offer sacrifices. Sometimes they would even offer human sacrifices. Knowing that Jerusalem would eventually be subject to siege, Hezekiah had been preparing for some time by fortifying the walls of the capital, building towers, and constructing a tunnel to bring fresh water to the city from a spring outside the city walls. And I also mentioned that some of you might have seen this tunnel. Here's a picture of Jean, my wife, walking through that tunnel that they excavated on the ground, the Hezekiah tunnel, just proving the Bible accurate. When the Assyrians came to attack, Isaiah states that God sent out an angel who in one night struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. That is what happens when you depend on God and not on the dumb idols. Nebuchadnezzar made 3 trips in about 20 years to Jerusalem in order to conquer that city. On his first visit in 605 BC, he took Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his 3 friends. Now, last week, Alan Green asked me about the names given to Daniel and his 3 friends. I thought I would put up a chart here, a screen, so that you can see what actually took place. You remember I said last week that it was all about creeping compromise. Nebuchadnezzar and his staff wanted to turn the minds of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And they offered them food that was offered to idols and things like that. Also gave them Babylonian names. And here are the Babylonian names and the meanings, and also the Jewish names. Daniel, the Jewish name, meant God is my judge. They gave Daniel Belteshazzar, which means Bel, that's the Babylonian god. Bel will protect you. Hananiah, Yahweh is gracious. That's God is gracious. His name, the new name, was Shadrach. It's inspired by Aku. That was another Babylonian god. Mishael, his name meant who is like God. That's Hebrew. And his Babylonian name, Meshach, belonging to Aku, the god. Azariah, who was Abednego, his Hebrew name was Yahweh is my help. That's God is my help. His Babylonian name, servant of Nego. Abednego, servant of Nego, another Babylonian god. So you can see how they were trying to indoctrinate these 4 young men. Now, I didn't get a chance to show you this map last week, but I want you to notice something here. Over here, if you follow my cursor, you will see that Jerusalem is over here, Mediterranean Sea, right on the coast. And they were taken to Babylon, a little less than 1,000 miles away, and they had to walk it all the way. The red portion of this map is the way they traveled, because the beige portion is a desert. So they had to walk all the way up, over, and down to Babylon, way over on this side. That was the track that they took. Now, this modern day map shows you that Babylon is in Iraq. See Iraq here? Babylon is over here in the Mediterranean Sea, and Iraq is over in, Babylon is over in Iraq, and they have found the ruins of Babylon. Now, we also looked at the test that Daniel and his 3 friends had to endure regarding the food offered them. We discovered how God intervened and made them healthier, wiser than all the other wise men in the kingdom. Now, the prophecy of Daniel 2 offers a view of history from the time of the Babylonian Empire to the end of the ages, the second coming. But this most important prophetic dream was not given to Daniel or some other prophet. It was given to a pagan king. God chose to give this important vision and dream to a pagan king. He knew what he was doing. The dream was given to Nebuchadnezzar during Daniel's first year of captivity. Nebuchadnezzar had just ascended to the throne of Babylon. Now, it was a crucial time for Nebuchadnezzar because he wanted to make sure that no rival was a threat to his reign as king. No wonder he was disturbed by the dream. He got together a group of experts in dream interpretation, also known as wise men. But they could not interpret the dream because the king could not remember it. So frustrated with the Babylonian experts' inability to tell him what his dream was, the king ordered all of them to be killed. Now, let us take a look at who these experts were. In Daniel 2, the enchanters were trained to keep the gods happy. The magicians and sorcerers attempted to protect the people by warding off demons. Now, this is all what they believed. I'm just sharing with you now what they believed at that time. The astrologers interpreted danger and predicted the future. The Chaldeans offered a variety of service. They were the ruling group of wise men in Babylon. Now, these wise men studied things like the livers of sheep. Those of you who are following the Revival Reformation readings from the General Conference in Ezekiel, you will have seen this in that chapter this morning about the people who looked at the livers of sheep. They also studied the behavior of birds in flight. They studied the spread of an oil drop over water in a vessel, the shape of clouds at sunset, and the color of the morning, the dawn. They valued dreams as direct communication from the gods. They really believed that the gods were giving them a message, and so they use all of these different things to interpret the dreams. Dreams were taken very seriously. When a dream seemed troubling, they believed it indicated an impending disaster. Therefore, it is understandable why Nebuchadnezzar became so anxious about a dream that he could no longer remember. He was really disturbed, ready to kill the wise men. When Nebuchadnezzar issued his decree to kill the wise men, Daniel and his companions had just finished their training and was admitted into the circle of the king's wise men. And it is for this reason why the death decree issued by the king applied to them as well. When Daniel heard about the death sentence, he approached Arioch, the man in charge of carrying out the executions, and requested to see the king immediately. When Daniel got to see the king, he requested time from the king in order to solve the mystery of the dream. This is fascinating. Why? Although the king had accused the magicians of trying to stall, he promptly granted the time Daniel requested. Why? It was a direct intervention of God, because Nebuchadnezzar was angry. He was angry. And for him to grant Daniel more time, God had to have intervened. Daniel certainly agreed with the magicians that no human being could solve such a mystery. But Daniel also knew of a God who could reveal both the content and the interpretation of the dream. Daniel immediately grabbed his three friends for a prayer session. They had a prayer meeting right away, knowing that they could be executed if God did not reveal the dream. Have you ever entered into prayer when your life counted on it? Well, that's what these four men experienced. God answered the prayer of the faithful young men. Daniel was now ready to report the content of the dream. However, listen to this, friends. Daniel risked causing another crisis. Why? Because the dream was not necessarily good news for Nebuchadnezzar. Think about it. Daniel gave credit to God, but Arioch gave credit only to himself. When he ushered Daniel into the king, this is what Arioch said: I have found a man of the captives of Judah. I have found a man. He didn't find any man, but he boasted. He said, this man will make known to the king the interpretation. In the dream, God showed a picture familiar to the king. Huge images, big statues were well known in the ancient world, but they usually represented gods. They found remains of large statues in the excavations there in the Holy Land of gods that the people erected. Now, the dream of the statue made of different metals indicated the sequence of world empires beginning with Babylon and culminating with the establishment of God's eternal kingdom. Each kingdom would come to an end and be replaced by a successive power until the stone would smash the statue and fill the earth. We will take a look at each of these kingdoms, but first, let us take a look at the king's response to Daniel's interpretation. King Nebuchadnezzar threw himself down before Daniel, worshiped him, and he commanded his people to offer sacrifices and burn sweet incense before him. The king said to Daniel, truly, your God is the greatest of gods, the Lord over kings, a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal the secret. He recognized that the source of Daniel's wisdom did not come from Daniel's own intelligence. He realized it came from Daniel's God. But remember this verse at the top here? He says, truly your God is the greatest of gods. Now let's look at the next slide. At this point in his experience, Nebuchadnezzar's faith could be classified as henotheism. If you have not heard that word before, it really means a belief in the superiority of one God without denying the existence of other gods. So Nebuchadnezzar at this point was a henotheist. Later on, we're going to find that he was converted to believe in the one true God. But right now, he believed in several gods, the God of heaven as superior to the other gods of Babylon. Let us take a look at the image in the dream in more detail. The head of gold represented Babylon. You have the dates there. Historian Herodotus, reported that gold decorated the city of Babylon. Gold everywhere. And so it was rather fitting that in the dream, Babylon would be characterized by the head of gold. The chest and arms of silver stand for Medo-Persia. Now, these countries were not named in the dream, but through study of history, it came out exactly. That is why I've often said to people, when you study the books of Daniel and Revelation, you have to study those books with the Bible in one hand and a history book in the other hand. Because when you compare the both, the history book shines light on Daniel and Revelation because it fills in the gaps and gives names to these kingdoms. Now, silver was a well-known metal used widely in Medo-Persia. They also used silver in their taxation system. The third kingdom, the belly and thighs of bronze, symbolized Greece. Greek soldiers were noted for their bronze armor. Then we come to the legs of iron, represented Rome. The iron represented the crushing power of the Roman Empire, which lasted longer than any of the previous kingdoms. Now the feet, partly of iron, partly of clay, represented a divided Europe. After Rome, the prophecy said that there would be no other earthly kingdom. There would be a divided kingdom or nation. Nations, because Rome would have been the last. Now, I want to show you here what transpired after the breakup of Rome. There were 10 divisions. Now, it is quite fitting that the feet of iron and clay would represent these divisions because, of course, the feet have 10 toes. And here are the toes, as it were. The Alemanis, today we know that country as Germany. The Franks, we know that country as France. Anglo-Saxons, that's England of the United Kingdom. Burgundians, that's Switzerland today. The Ostrogoths, they were exterminated. The Suevi, that's Portugal. Lombards, Italy. Vandals, they were exterminated. The Visigoths, that's Spain today. And the Heruli, they were exterminated. So we still have some of the divisions in existence today under different names, and you recognize all of those countries. Everything came to pass just as God prophesied. Now, although many attempts have been made to unify Europe, ranging from marriage alliances between royal families to the present European Union, division and disunity have prevailed, and according to this prophecy, will remain so until God established his eternal kingdom. They will never be united. Even today, you see what's happening with Brexit. You've heard about it in the news, how they have pulled away from the European Union. Now, many ambitious and talented men have tried to unite Europe. Charlemagne, who was a general of the Franks, tried to do so in the 8th century. Napoleon, the French general, he tried to do that in the 19th century. Adolf Hitler in the 20th century. You remember his famous line? He says, Germany over all. He wanted Germany to be a kingdom, a world kingdom, as it were. But none of these men succeeded. God said it would never happen. And up until this day, it has not happened, and it will never happen. The next empire portrayed by Daniel's prophecy will be the worldwide kingdom of God, ushered in by the glorious second coming of Jesus. The stone in the dream comes untouched by human hands. In other words, although each of the previous kingdoms eventually comes to an end, the kingdom represented by the stone will last forever. The Bible makes plain that this stone is Jesus. The Bible often refers to Christ as a rock or a stone. 1 Corinthians 10:4 describes Jesus as a rock. But the most applicable reference to the stone or rock in Daniel 2:44 is what Jesus said about himself in Luke 20:18. In the warning to the Jewish leaders about their rejection of him, he said, whoever falls on that stone will be broken. Now, the stone is Jesus. Falling on Jesus will be broken. In other words, when you give your life to Jesus, but on whomever it falls, if the stone falls on that person, it will grind him to powder. So that is the interpretation of what it means there in Luke 20. Whoever falls on the stone will be broken, means conversion. But on whomever it falls, it will grind him to powder. That is when a person rejects Jesus Christ. The stone falls on the feet of the image and crushes them into fine chaff that is blown away. The reference to the stone has to do with judgment of the world. Everyone has to decide what to do with the stone. Will it be to us a despised stone or a precious stone? Will it be to us a stone of condemnation or a stone of salvation? That stone is Jesus Christ. The rock either breaks or grinds. Here are the two distinct choices: broken now in repentance or crushed later in judgment. The stone gives way to a mountain. It says the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. What is that all about? Well, this mountain is most likely Mount Zion of the New Jerusalem. Revelation 14:1, then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. Daniel and Revelation is all about symbolisms. And so here we have when the rock, Jesus Christ, strikes the image, in other words, bringing all earthly kingdoms to an end, he's going to set up a new kingdom that will last forever. That's the New Jerusalem, the heavenly kingdom, the glorious kingdom. That is what that all symbolizes. As we contemplate the statue as a representation of the world empires and the systems of power, we realize that we're living at the time of the end. Please note that Daniel 2 is not a conditional prophecy. It is one that will surely come to pass. You remember when we were reading Daniel 2, God said in that prophecy that this prophecy is true and certain. Well, the stone is coming, my dear friends. The stone is coming. The question that I have to ask myself, the question that you have to ask yourself is, are we ready for the stone? Are we ready for Jesus to come? As the well-known song says, are we ready for Jesus to come? Are we faithful in all that we do? Have we stood for the right? Have we fought a good fight? Are we ready for Jesus to come? That is chapter 2.